Kennedy from the Center for Academic Success, and I'm here today to talk about the day of the test and test-taking hacks. Let's get started. Okay, everybody knows to eat and drink before you go. I know. Hunger and thirst can be powerful distractions, and also if you're not hydrated, your brain doesn't function as well. So another thing you can do to help get oxygen to your brain besides drinking is exercise right before you go for a brisk walk or something. Gum chewing has been known to improve focus, and if you're anxious, then try sniffing essential oils. You can get them for about $5 at Walmart in the candle section. But research has shown that sniffing a calming scent like lavender or rosemary can reduce test anxiety. Make sure you're early enough that you don't miss the instructions. It will cause undue stress if you're walking in late. So plan to be earlier than you normally would. Now, when your professor gives you the test, first thing you want to do is a brain dump. This is writing any notes on the back. I'm talking to you, crammers. That you might not remember by the time you get to that question. Now, you want to take this time to skim the whole test before you start. This does two things. One, it alerts your brain to the topics that you might not otherwise know and gives clues. So, if you don't know number 3, but a similar question is asked in question 35, it helps you connect the dots so that you know when you go back and start number 3 to look at question 35, because the piece of the answer you don't know is in 35 that you can use to answer 3. Secondly, skimming the whole test before you start lowers your anxiety because it gives your brain something useful to do related to the test, but it's also not demanding any retrieval skills from your brain yet. So as you skim, circle words that change the meaning of the question. For example, the word not. You want to answer questions in order of increasing difficulty. Make sure you don't leave any blank though. But easiest to hardest does two things. Number one, it builds your internal confidence. So as you start to get a few that you know are correct, you start to feel like, oh, maybe I can do this after all, as opposed to having your confidence go down by answering the first 5 questions, none of which looked familiar. Number 2, it ensures that you answer the questions you would have gotten right if you had enough time. So let's say, theoretically, the only questions you knew were the last 10 questions. If you never even get to those last 10 questions, you see what I mean? You didn't even have enough time to answer the ones you would have gotten right. So start easiest to hardest. Budget your time according to your point values. If your test is worth 100 points and the essay is only worth 10, you don't want to spend half your time on it. Checking your answers at the end of each page increases the likelihood you're going to catch more of your mistakes than if you wait till the very end. This is my favorite test-taking tip of all time, a confidence rating scale. In the margin of your test, as you answer, rate your confidence in your answer from 1 to 5. 1 meaning, I don't know where this professor got this, I've never heard this before. 5 being, I know that I know that I know this. Okay? So if you're running out of time, go back to the 3s first, because the 3s are the ones that you probably were choosing between this possible answer or this possible answer. There were 2 good options and you just couldn't decide between them. So if you're running out of time, go back and hit the 3s. Your subconscious brain will have kept working on it. It can multitask as you're taking the test. And now you may suddenly know it. And then if you still have time, you can hit the 4s or the 2s. Scantron tests. My pro tip for making sure that you're transferring everything is after you've read the question and figured out the answer and you're about to fill it in on the Scantron, just lightly touch either your pencil or your finger to the letter and say that letter in your head. D. And now as I go to the Scantron sheet, it reduces the chance that I'm going to bubble in the wrong letter. Math test, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. When you're using scratch paper, make sure that you draw a box around each problem's work so that as you're copying it over to the test, you don't accidentally pull data from a different problem. Whoops. And always turn that scratch paper in even if you're not required to. Let's say you answered it correctly on the scratch paper, but you miscopied something over to the test. Well, you know, if you had answered it right on the scratch paper, you're probably going to get credit or partial credit. But if you didn't turn that scratch paper in, nobody knows. Essay questions. Make sure you answer all parts of the question and that it's well organized. My best tip for essay questions is make a quick outline on the back side I know you don't like outlines, but it will help increase the number of points you'll get, because not only will it be more organized, it will help your essay stay on topic, so those prone to rabbit trails will give the right amount of attention to each thing. And make sure you read all the parts of the question. Some essay questions are about 3 sentences long, and many students stop after the first question and start answering, or after the first sentence and start answering. Make sure you've read the whole thing. Okay, let's shift to true-false questions. When you choose false, determine why. And if a question is true, every detail about it has to be true. So if it's a long sentence and there's multiple phrases in the sentence and one of them isn't true, guess what? The whole statement isn't true then. On the flip side, if any part of that long statement is false, just one little phrase is false, then the whole thing is false. Okay? Statements that tend to give reasons and they're trying too hard to convince you, those tend to be false. And statistically, there are more true answers than false. Continuing with true false, absolute qualifiers, or words that describe that are really hardcore, things like always, never, everyone, none, all, those tend to be false. Whereas more conservative general qualifiers like often, usually, sometimes, generally, probably, those are more conservative words that tend to make the true-false statement true. Keep in mind the effect of a double negative on a statement. So, for example, not illogical. Illogical means not logical. So, not illogical means not logical. Okay? So it means the same as logical. Simplify that just like in math. Get rid of your double negatives so that you can understand the question. Let's shift to fill in the blank. If you don't know it right away, generate a few possible answers. Watch how many blanks there are. That corresponds to how many words the instructor is looking for. And if you can't think of the word, then use a synonym or a description of the word. You might get partial credit. If you think of 2 possible answers and you can't decide between them, write them both down. That's better than picking the wrong one. Use those descriptive qualifiers that are more conservative, like might, sometimes, generally, to increase the chances that your answer is at least partially correct. And then after you fill in the blank, reread the sentence, making sure it's correct grammatically. All right, let's shift gears to multiple choice now. My biggest tip is to cover the letters when you're reading the question. Now, you need to arrange this with your professor in advance. You can tell them a few days before, Rachel said I should cover the answers and try to generate my own response without looking at the ABCD. Should I bring my own paper on the day of the test, or would you like to bring a paper that you know is clean? And then work accordingly. But cover the ABCD, read the question, generate your own response, and then look. If there's an answer there that matches your response, ding, 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 that's a 5 on the confidence rating scale, okay? You know that's correct if you pulled it out of your brain with no cues and no visual prompts, okay? Read each question twice. If you only read it once, your brain can default to whatever looks the most familiar, which may or may not be correct. If you don't know the answer, narrow it down by crossing out what isn't correct. We all know that one. But, pro tip, read the 2 options that are left, treating each one as a true-false statement. That's a different way to maneuver the information in your head and hopefully come up with the right one. Watch out for all the above. Here's the rules for that. If even one of them isn't correct, so D is all the above, and A and B are correct, but C is not, then don't choose this. However, if 2 or more are correct, A and B are correct, but you don't know about C, but you know A and B are correct, chances are that all the above is right. Watch out for 2 similar answers. Test makers will often use 2 very similar looking words to confuse you. So if you have no idea and you have to guess, maybe choose one of those 2 similar looking responses and you've got a 50-50 chance. If you're out of time, speaking of guessing randomly, don't guess randomly, pick the same letter for the last few questions. So you have 5 questions to go, but your professor's collecting the exam. Just pick all 5 of the same letter, all C's. Otherwise, you may get them all wrong, but if you pick the same letter, you'll probably at least get one of them right. And it will also cue your instructor probably that you ran out of time, and maybe they need to make a shorter test. Okay, multiple choice continue. The following are usually wrong. Options with absolutes, like always, never. And then options with the highest and lowest number, it's usually one of the middle ones. Options with jokes. You are not going to earn brownie points with your instructor by picking options that they think are funny and wrote to entertain you. That was a freebie, and it just shows your ignorance if you pick that one. Options with unfamiliar terms are also usually wrong. And then the following are usually right. Options with one of two very similar looking responses. Remember, we said test makers use two similar looking responses to confuse you. Options with more complete or inclusive answers. So you've got three that have very short ones and then one that's really long. It might be that one. Options that read all the above or none of the above tend to be more often true unless your instructor does that on every question. Remember, there is no prize for handing your test in first. Quite often the people who hand them in first are just the ones who gave up sooner. And the people who are the last one to turn it in sometimes are the highest scorers. So now you have some tools in your tool belt, and I encourage you to visit our study skills tutors to kind of work through implementing more of these into your practice of test taking, and go fight win.